All right, might get started. So hi to everybody who's joining us. It's great to see so many of you and so many familiar names. Welcome to the next Audience Outlook Monitor webinar. I'm Lena Stein and I'm a Research Associate at the Australia Council for the Arts. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded land of the Bidjigal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And I also acknowledge and pay my respects to the many nations across Australia that we're tuning in from, and to all First Nations colleagues online here today. So I know many of you are familiar with the Audience Outlook Monitor, but if not, this groundbreaking tracking study has been delivered by our partners Patternmakers and Wolf Brown since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and has continued to capture audience insights and guide strategic planning for the arts and cultural sector. Today's webinar topic is a deep dive on regional audiences. Rebuilding and engaging regional audiences is crucial to the recovery of the sector as arts and cultural hubs in regional locations begin to open up in outbreak-affected states and territories, and as those in other jurisdictions might start welcoming interstate visitors, and as organisations begin to plan for statewide and nationwide touring. With increasing vaccination rates and now an easing of lockdowns with travel within and between some jurisdictions now possible, there are differences in feelings towards risk and opening for regional audiences around the country. So to discuss insights and strategies for rebuilding regional audiences, thank you and welcome to Tandi Palmer Williams, Managing Director of Patternmakers, and Scott Howie, General Manager of Regional Arts Australia. Welcome and thank you again. And thank you again to all of you out there for taking the time out of your day to be here. Please do drop into the chat to introduce yourselves. Tell us where you're tuning in from today or any thoughts or comments as they come up. If you'd like to ask a question, there's a Q&A box down the bottom of your screen, so please pop any into that box and we'll get to as many as we can throughout the session. I'd also like to thank and welcome Elisa and Rebecca, who are Auslan interpreting for us today. Thanks again, and I'll throw over to you, Tandi.
Hi everyone, so great to be with you today. Hello to everyone who's joining us. I'm beaming in from Bundjalung country. Lovely to hear in the chat where you're tuning in from. Hi Chris. Hi Liz, how are you? I hope we'll see a bunch of different names and places across Australia jumping in on the chat, so please don't be shy. It helps me feel like I'm not just alone up here if I know who's out there, and feel connected with you all. It'd be great to have a good chat today and really put our heads together on this topic of rebuilding regional audiences. Good morning, Scott. It's great to be with you as well. Tell us how you are and what's happening in Wagga Wagga this week. Oh, you're on mute. I think you're still on mute, Scott.
Sorry.
There you are. Hello.
I'm coming in from the beautiful Wiradjuri Nation here in Wagga Wagga on the banks of the Murrumbidgee River. And we're feeling pretty cautious at the moment around what's going on here. We're starting to see our first cases of COVID come through, so we're all starting to get a little bit on edge.
Yes, it's certainly a time where lots is changing, isn't it? Good morning to Robbie. Hi Rebecca. Hello Anne. Good to see you. Sean, hello. Thanks for sharing. Hello Emma. Good to be here today. All right, well, as Lena said, we're going to be drawing on the data from the Audience Outlook Monitor to have a look at what is happening in regional areas, how it's a little bit different to what's happening in some metropolitan areas today. We're going to be drawing on two main data sets: July, where we had about 9,000 responses across Australia, and then the October pulse check, which was just a small data collection exercise at the very end of September and early October, just to get a little bit of an update from some audiences on how they were feeling ahead of things changing so much. We're going to be going into field again in November. And for those who aren't familiar with the study, Bianca, my colleague, is here today and she can share a link to the methodology. But basically, it's like a cross-sector collaborative data collection exercise where we have 130 organisations all surveying a random sample of their past attendees, and then we aggregate that all together in a dashboard. And that dashboard's available for anyone to access. It's free to use, and you can look and zoom in on different demographic groups, different jurisdictions, and have a look and explore the data that's relevant to you. And if anytime you need help with that, just contact our team and we can try and get you the data that you need. So basically, as I mentioned, this is a survey that goes out to thousands of audience members. And today we'll have a look at how things are a little bit different in the outbreak affected states. So that, we're calling New South Wales, ACT and Victoria kind of outbreak affected. And then there's the rest of Australia. So things are quite different in the outbreak affected states versus the rest of Australia. So we'll look at regional audiences in outbreak affected states and in the rest of Australia, and we'll compare them to metropolitan audiences in those places as well. So obviously with things changing so much, I'm going to start just by sharing kind of what happened over the course of the pandemic. So basically, and I've shown here two data points. One is the metropolitan audience and the other is the regional and remote audiences. And so we'll see May last year was our first data collection where everything was closed. That was a pretty dark time. July 2020, things started to rebuild. Through to September, we had still the Victorian lockdown ongoing at that time. Over summer, things started to feel pretty normal, didn't they? That was nice. We weren't wearing masks, we were going out. It was pretty good summer. In March, our data collection showed a lot of confidence and buoyancy in the market, but things started to change, obviously, with the emergence of the Delta strain. And so in July, we saw that activity start to drop back, particularly, this is the national average, but particularly in New South Wales and then the other outbreak affected states, we've seen obviously activity go right down and confidence be affected as well. So what's interesting to note here is you'll notice that regional attendance rates were just slightly below metropolitan rates all the way along, except in July, regional attendance was actually slightly higher than the proportion in metropolitan areas that were attending. So this is obviously because regional Australia has been slightly less affected on average by lockdowns, although plenty of regional audiences have been affected by cancellations and the kind of the effects of all of the complexity that's happening right now. So despite fewer lockdowns, what's interesting to note is that regional audiences tend to be a little bit more cautious than those in major cities. So here I'm showing basically what we call the risk profile or readiness to attend in regional Australia. And this is from the October pulse check. Basically, I'm showing the regional audience in outbreak affected states. So there you can see at the top that 54% are in the pink, and they're the group that we call slightly risk averse. So they'll go out when they're reasonably confident that the risk of transmission is minimal. They're prepared to live with a little bit of risk, but they want that to be, quite well managed. They generally don't want to go into, high risk settings, although they are generally keen to get back to attending. The group in the red are ready to attend now. They will be out there as soon as they can. They're already back out there. They were the ones lining up around the block as soon as museums opened. And that is, it's a sizable group right now. It's about 50 or so percent across the country. But basically, they will be right back at it. We'll expect to see them back first, and they'll be the most relaxed kind of thing. It's the group that's sort of more risk averse that often we need to be thinking about. They're often staying home a bit more, being a bit more cautious about what they commit to, and they want to see some more stringent kind of COVID safe arrangements. So that's a little bit to bear in mind. Hello to everyone who's joining us since I last said hello. Janice, hi Helen, Michelle, Darcy, hello. Hello Kim, so good for you to be here with us today. What I'd love to know from you, if you can pop in the chat, have you reopened after being closed? Have you been open this whole last few months? What's going on for you? Are you working towards a new date? Is there something in particular you want to get out of today's session? I'd just love to know what's on your mind, and if there's anything we can cover in this session that's going to help you right now, please don't be shy, pop it in the chat so we can have a chat about that. So basically, in terms of what we can expect from regional audiences, another thing I just wanted to point out is that last minute decision making, we tend to see that happening in regional areas. We're seeing it generally outside of lockdown a lot, but we should prepare ourselves at regional events and venues that is could happen again over the summer. We're likely to see some people making last minute decision making. There is a sense of planning ahead at the same time. So a lot of people are looking a little bit further ahead to what they hope will be a kind of a simpler situation where things are a little bit more settled. So we are seeing people wanting to book things in for, the late summer and autumn next year, where they think, things will be a little bit more certain. Right now, there's a big sense of kind of just wait and see among some segments. And we'll see that manifest in terms of last minute decision making in some areas. So it's a good idea to kind of think about, well, what does that mean for our marketing spend? What does that mean in terms of the types of marketing that we do? And what do we need to put in place to just manage that a little bit of uncertainty right up until the event? So I'll come to COVID safety now. Basically, most regional audience members find COVID safety measures very encouraging. So here I've got all of the measures down the left-hand side, and in the dark red, it's the proportion that say that measure is encouraging or very encouraging. In the red, we've got neutral, and in the pink or light red, we've got the proportion that would actually find that measure discouraging. So we know that certain measures do risk turning some people off. So if you look down the list, right up the top, we've got improving ventilation. Now, this is not a straightforward thing to do, obviously, but it's something that audiences have become more conscious of and worried about in relation to the Delta strain. So if there is that opportunity to look at arrangements at your venue or your festival site or whatever it is to improve the ventilation, then do take that opportunity to look into that. And things like turning on outside air and looking at air filtration even. So it is something that we can communicate better to audiences if there are improvements we can make just to put people at ease. But then going down the list, requiring check-ins, obviously that is kind of standard now. Everyone pretty much wants to see that. Next on the list is actually proof of vaccination at entry. So this is a measure that has widespread support among audiences right now, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the moment. Then we've got masks for everyone 12 plus. Then we come down to the social distancing arrangements. So 1.5 spacing between seated groups is the kind of like preferred social distancing arrangement. Obviously, that's not necessarily feasible or viable in all settings. When we come to capacity limitations, some people, or density limitations, some people tend more to the neutral in regard to that, because sometimes people feel like they can't be meaningfully enforced inside a venue, and there might be a density requirement, but kind of once you're in, you might still not be able to observe social distancing, whether it's entering or exiting a performance or at the toilets or whatever it might be. So some people, we start to see views tend more to the neutral in regard to that. And we know with some of the state roadmaps coming out that we are likely to see those density requirements lift in time. Masks for all attendees, including children, is a bit more polarizing. And I will say that regional audiences are slightly more polarized on certain mask policies than metropolitan audiences. And taking temperatures, this is becoming a far less common method. So interestingly, what's interesting us is that proof of vaccination is sort of quite contentious right now. It's really new, it's really topical in the general community. Among arts audiences, there's quite a quite high degree of consensus that it's needed right now. And it's actually more likely that a mask policy could turn someone off in practice. So most people find them encouraging and see the need for them as that kind of last line of defense. But they are starting to emerge as you know, an area that may turn some people off down the track. So I think it's always good for us to be kind of working towards that day when we no longer need them, and looking at settings where they might not be required. So the outdoor events, that kind of thing. Scott, any thoughts from you on kind of what are your takeaways from seeing this data? Are you surprised to hear that regional audiences are a bit more cautious, or is that sort of follow your expectations?
I think it's completely right that we're more cautious. I mean, my situation just personally in Wagga is we've had very minimal contact with COVID throughout the pandemic. And so we're actually gearing up for our first outbreaks of the virus, and we're watching it slowly move around New South Wales, and communities just down the road are starting to get it. So I think there's still a reluctance. I really see that reluctance in people going out. I love that that we're really okay around double vaccination and vaccination requirements. I know in some of the places that I go to, I live just outside of Wagga, and our pub shut down because there were some bolshy people who didn't want to have to show their vaccination certificates. But so I'm much more reassured that that's happening across the state at a much higher level. That's
right. Yeah, I think that this data is quite encouraging. It's obviously, I can see why there's a degree of nervousness around the policy settings, absolutely, especially in New South Wales, where it is going to be a little bit more discretion in regard to what the policy will be from 1st of December. In Victoria, it looks like things are going to be, it's definitely the language at the moment is it will be a kind of a vaccinated event economy. So there's that in Victoria to, I guess, alleviate the pressure on organisations. But in New South Wales, still a little bit of decision making to work through. But I think this data provides a good basis for that decision making. Just checking in the chat. So Paul said, very interested in any experience in managing double vaccination requirements of museum visitors. So can I put a call out to everyone who's here today? If you are actually doing that or planning to do that, can you share your experiences? Is there any advice you can share? It would be great to kind of draw on the collective knowledge of everyone here today to start chatting more about that. Janice has said they've had their first performance back at the Forge Theatre in East Gippsland. Oh, it's planned to be on 11th of November. Excellent. And 6 more productions through the middle of December. 2022 is completely full with shows rescheduled. Excellent. I would like to know what would encourage audiences to return and what messages they will respond to. I think, there's a lot of positivity and everyone wants to feel positive. There is still that little bit of caution. Many people are just waiting to see how things go in the next few weeks. What is the outcome going to be of opening up? Are we going to see rates, skyrocket or bubble along? So a lot of people waiting to see, but I think everyone among, in our sample, a lot of people are keen to get back to events when they can. And I know a lot of people are feeling optimistic about 2022. I think it's wise for us to have a contingency plan if we do have uncertainty in 2022 again. But obviously we want to hope and plan for the best as well. And I think it's almost a case of re-normalizing attendance. I think we've all become a little bit more homebody-ish after many weeks of lockdown, and we're sort of waiting to see. Supply is obviously going to be a big issue as well. So it's almost like not just hitting these messages in terms of COVID safety, obviously, but a lot of audiences really respond to, they want to show their support. I think that's been one of my big takeaways is just through the pandemic, our audience sample, we hear from thousands and thousands of audience members every few months, and just so many people wanting to show their support. And so if we can signal that, I've got a slide a little bit later on too on some of the themes that you can refer to in your marketing and programming, which are relevant right now. So let's come back to that. But basically, I wanted to just refer to the data from regional audiences in the rest of the country. So I'm not sure if I made this clear, but this data, this red chart, is from regional audiences in outbreak affected states. And the data is quite similar for regional audiences in the rest of the country. Basically, check-ins and vaccination passports are, roughly equally encouraging. However, some things like social distancing and masks, people find slightly less encouraging. Obviously, in the rest of Australia, there's few or no cases in many areas, and so regional audiences in those locations are enjoying relatively unrestricted attendance. So to think about masks or social distancing in an environment where those currently aren't required is a little bit challenging for some people. So as we see borders opening, there's obviously just going to be a little bit of a transition period in those states. Queensland has announced its border will be opening, but it's yet to be seen kind of what that means for events in Queensland and what we'll see in terms of transmission rates. So all of this is likely to change, and in late November we'll have an update for you on all this data. For now, this is what we know. So basically, I'll share some comments for you from audiences. So one person said, I'm happy to take on whatever rules are at the time and also the percentage of vaccinated people in the community. So we know that people have wanted to get to, 80%, 90% is going to give a lot of confidence in the audience base. Another person said, I personally am not concerned. I'm fully vaccinated and consider the risks acceptable for all scenarios. That doesn't, however, mean I'm neutral on the options in the wider sense. I do think reasonable precautions should be mandated to serve the community at large, those who cannot be vaccinated, reducing pressure on health services, etc. So interestingly, audiences are quite supportive of, some audiences are supportive of lifting density and capacity limitations. There's a segment of audiences that are really aware that it's not viable for, all venues and facilities to have density caps and capacity limitations. And so they want to see those lift. There is a segment, however, that's really cautious about that. So basically, I'll show you what we know about the different venue types right now. So here on screen, you can see the proportion of regional audiences in outbreak-affected states who would be very comfortable to attend selected cultural venues right now. So basically, this is regional New South Wales, regional Victoria. And basically what we're seeing is this is the proportion that are very comfortable to do this. On top of this, we have a segment that are somewhat comfortable to do at these types of venues. So right at the top of the list, an outdoor event with fixed seating. That's been really popular, particularly in the warmer months. We find that kind of emerges to the top of the list. And what we see is that, 2/3 are currently very comfortable doing that, which is fantastic. Then it comes to museums and galleries, where we've got today a majority are very comfortable doing that. A community art space, large theatre, concert hall, slightly further down the list, outdoor event without fixed seating, and then we get to comedy clubs and live music venues, which is kind of a little bit more intimate, and hands-on exhibits. That's sort of people still don't really want to touch too much. That is changing. So what we've shown in the light blue is what the conditions were at on the 1st of October. And what we asked people is, when we reach 80% and if vaccine passports are required and masks are worn indoors, how comfortable would you be then? And what we saw is a big jump in the proportion who are very comfortable. So you'll see in the dark blue the jump. But you'll notice that for certain types of events, it's a small jump. So for outdoor events, it makes a little bit of a difference, not that much. People were already quite comfortable with that. These new conditions don't change it that much, but for other venues, they really do. So one of the biggest impacts we'll see from reaching these vaccination targets and requiring proof of vaccination at entry and masks is that the proportion who are very comfortable to, say, go to a concert in a large theatre is going to jump well into the majority, which is fantastic to see. So we're likely to see most venue types have a majority of people who are very comfortable with this, which is excellent. If vaccination passports aren't required after, say, 1 December in New South Wales, I think we could see this challenged. But right now, there's a lot to be positive about in terms of the proportion that feel very comfortable doing these things under these circumstances. So now we'll have a look at the regional audiences in the rest of the country. So you'll remember that these audiences are already enjoying relatively unrestricted events, very low levels of risk. And so they already have a majority who are very comfortable. When we talk about this opening scenario where borders are open, and there's the potential for those transmission rates to rise, what we'll see is that the opening scenario actually can kind of challenge confidence in some areas. So I think it's a sign that around the rest of the country, we could actually see the proportion who are very comfortable to attend actually be challenged a little bit as things open up. So as we see borders opening, if cases emerge in the community, we might see that drop off a little bit in terms of very comfortable. But I think what this shows is it's not going to be like a huge change kind of thing. I think it will affect confidence for some people, but a majority is still going to be very comfortable. So I think that's something to feel confident in as we look ahead. So I'll share some of the comments we've had from regional audiences outside of the outbreak affected states. So at present, I have no idea how the opening up in New South Wales and Victoria will play out. As we are not currently in this position, I would need to wait and see what happens. Another person said it's hard being in Queensland and watching what's happening in New South Wales and Victoria. Opening borders feels like it would become inevitable for a wave of cases, hospitalisation and deaths to occur here. So people are conscious of the changes, what they'll mean for their regional community, and what we're going to see in the coming months could change quite dramatically. That person there has signaled that wait and see view, which is just, let's see the outcomes of the next few weeks. Let's not make huge levels of commitments right now to attend events. We'll just wait and see. So I think let's keep going, and we'll come back to that idea in a moment. So I mentioned that there's high levels of support for proof of vaccination, and here's the data specifically on that, just comparing regional and outbreak affected states. Metro and outbreak affected states is slightly higher levels of support. Regional and the rest of the country, still very high levels of support, and metro and the rest of the country. So basically, that is strong levels of support almost everywhere for vaccination passports. I'll see if we've got some more comments here. So basically, most audiences see the need for them, and in fact, some won't attend without them. So in November, we're actually going to be measuring this. A lot of people told us qualitatively in October that they won't attend without them in place. So here's some comments. Knowing everyone was vaccinated, wearing masks and still socially distanced would put my mind at ease while attending cultural events. Living with a family member who works in a hospital and comes into contact with aged care workers too does make me prefer stricter entry requirements. Another person said robust systems for verification of vaccination status are very important to ensure confidence in the public. So I will notice Bianca and I had, a hell of a time analysing the data in October because there were so many strong views. We all know in our communities there are a range of different views on topics, and vaccination is certainly one of the most charged conversations right now. I'd say there's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration, particularly from vaccinated people towards unvaccinated people. And we think it's kind of at the height of those conversations right now. So in the coming months, things may settle down a little bit. And we may see things like rapid testing emerge onto the market to provide an alternative or additional measure of support for certain events. Yet to be seen exactly how that will work, what the price point will be, and how widely available, that kind of thing. But we're certainly seeing overseas in Europe and the US, rapid testing being accepted as an alternative to proof of vaccination at major events like festivals and that kind of thing. So definitely one to watch. Hopefully we'll know more from November onwards as those become more available. So a couple of things that have come up in relation to regional audiences is just things like this. So I live in regional New South Wales and have not had the opportunity to be fully vaccinated due to lack of supply. Mandating double vaccination to access venues excludes members of our community. Another person said proof of vaccination doesn't stop a vaccinated person being asymptomatic and COVID positive. So some degree of caution is still necessary. Even now that I'm vaccinated, I still don't want to experience a low level case of COVID-19. We're also showing that basically people are worried sometimes about becoming a kind of a close contact and getting into a situation where they need to isolate for 2 weeks. For instance, that can be something that makes people feel cautious, even, in addition to the virus itself, interestingly. So Helen shared in the chat, the data shows government and industry messages promoting vaccination are really getting through. So yeah, we've seen very high levels of vaccination among arts audiences. Back in July, it was showing, our data was showing that a very large proportion of audiences were taking up vaccination faster than the general population. And in October, it showed that held true. So we're seeing very, very high levels of vaccination among arts audiences, which is great to see. I'll just share another comment. So in addition to the 80% vaccinated rule, there should be the qualification that everyone eligible has been provided an opportunity to be vaccinated. There is evidence, or rather I have read, that some vulnerable members of society, such as disabled and carers, First Nations, especially remote, have not yet provided the opportunity to be vaccinated. So basically what we're seeing is some regional areas have been slower to reach vaccination targets relative to metropolitan areas. And there are some issues in relation to certain disadvantaged groups. So hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll see those supply issues very much ironed out. And once we get to the point where everyone eligible has actually had that opportunity, we should see things start to settle down as we kind of transition into that more COVID normal way of living. So basically what we're seeing, given that some regional areas have been slightly slower to accept those vaccination targets, and for instance, in New South Wales, we've got regional travel opening up from 1 November, there is just that slight trepidation of what will the as we have lockdown in Sydney and Melbourne, people flooding into regional areas to get out of the city, what's that going to mean for regional communities? And that's where we see just that slight level of importance, I guess I'd say slightly greater importance of just a really vigilant approach to COVID safety, just to keep members of the local community feeling safe and protected. So basically, what I'll do now is move on to some of the statistics about online. Scott, any thoughts on kind of vaccination issues? I'd love to know if you, in the chat, are you grappling with something around that? Are you already kind of looking at it in your organisation? What can you tell us in terms of the practicalities for you? Scott, any thoughts?
I think, I think it's going through every organisation, arts organisations, around the notion of whether or not you'll have mandatory vaccination for your staff, and where you can, and given the amount of travel and the amount of connection that arts organisations tend to do, that's an interesting philosophical debate to have, particularly around the safety. I'm really interested. I'm just going to throw back to something else. People are talking about how they've got lots of things programmed for next year. I think next year is going to be a really interesting one for the demands on the audience wallet. Venues are reporting, larger than usual seasons, and that their hires, they're booked out primarily because everybody's been pushing shows back over 21. So I think that's something that we need to watch out for. I guess the capacity of the market to attend everything that's going to be on offer.
Yeah, we could very soon flip into almost the reverse of what we have now, where people who've been locked down are desperate to go out, and some things are selling very, very well right now. But yeah, we could see that supply situation change quite dramatically next year. I'm not sure if I've got some slides on that, but back in July, when we collected data on attitudes towards forward spending, it was pretty positive. We've got about 3/4 saying they expect their spending to return to kind of pre-pandemic levels. And I think some people want to kind of do that make up for lost time thing, but we do have to consider that it's been now over 18 months of a pandemic, and we're starting to kind of look at some people have been really grappling with how they want to live and what their life looks like. And so I think there's a lot of change happening, and we'll see. I guess I'm just coming back to that idea of renormalizing going out and attending. Some people feel quite cautious right now and feeling like they're not ready to kind of commit to big social gatherings and stuff. So I think looking ahead to 22 and imagining a very busy social calendar is quite a gear shift, isn't it? I think we're going to have to allow for some time to build back up. And just while there is still a pandemic raging around the world, we're not going to see things return to normal for quite some time. Obviously, we're very much looking at a new normal, and it's yet to be seen what we go back to. But I'll share some more data just about what we can expect in terms of the outlook, and some programming insights as well. So basically, I thought I'd just touch on the digital thing. So basically what I'm showing here is, on the left, we've got regional and remote audiences. On the right, we've got metropolitan audiences. The green is the outbreak affected states and the blue is the rest of Australia. So what we see is that, you know, regional audiences in outbreak affected states are participating slightly more than the rest of Australia, which kind of makes sense. You know, some of those audiences have been locked down or had restricted access to the volume of events that they used to have. So they're participating slightly more, but regional audiences are not participating as in as high proportions as metropolitan audiences. And that kind of follows trends in the digital inclusion generally. So I think it's interesting. We have heard from some audiences that digital has provided an enormous opportunity and they've got a lot out of it. Others saying that their access isn't as good as it could be. So one person said, our internet phone access is very limited as we're in a remote area. Also, I do not get the same level of enjoyment watching something as a distance. The atmosphere is completely different. So I think it's quite a mixed situation. Some just simply aren't aware of what's available. So I gather there's a lot of online options available. I had not realized that there was much going on in this space at all. I will now start actively searching, but I'm not sure where to start. I do not know how to look for these experiences. Since COVID, I've seen a lot through Instagram, which I started using 12 months ago. So interestingly, when it comes to digital, our partner, Alan at Wolf Brown, believes that we're at a really early stage in the kind of product development life cycle in terms of digital events and digital experiences, and that there's still a long way to go in terms of finding the models that work, that are viable. And I think a lot of organizations still in that experimental approach, developing new models, testing price points. It's going to be a really interesting time. And I think my take on it is, in terms of digital innovation, that we should have kind of like 10-year plans in terms of slowly over time building those skills and capacities. I don't think it's something we can completely ignore now that kind of lockdown's over. Although we do see, I'll show you that data in a minute, audiences wanting to get back to real, live events. So we're likely to see that digital participation drop slightly again. But I think there's a lot to be said about everything we've learned through the pandemic, and there are segments that continue to engage, and one segment in particular that want to engage deeply. So I'll show a little bit more about that. So what we asked in July is basically, when you're not in lockdown and when venues are open and it's possible to attend, what role do online events and experiences play in your life? And you'll see how the data plays out for regional Australians here. So 10%, that's the digital devotees, we call them. They see a substantial role for digital in their life after lockdown. 39%, we call them selective but supportive, and they see a small role for digital in their life. We also call those the busy people. They tend to, on average, they're more likely to work full time. They're more likely to have kids. They generally have more demands on their time, and they'll opt into digital where it suits them. And then we've got our tired of tech segment. So this is actually 51% of all regional audiences right now. And I think Bianca, help me. I think it's a similar amount, not quite as high among metro audiences, but basically they don't see any role for digital after lockdown. So if you say that the two blue segments add up to 49%, and 51% don't see any role. So we've got about half, right? Half of audiences see at least some role for digital in their life, whether that's, a small role or a substantial role, and then 50% don't see any role. So I think it's a good reality check on reach of digital experiences. I know we've had some big aspirations, and some big online events do reach a big audience. But I think as we move out of our kind of lockdown era and into you know, a post-lockdown kind of boom in physical attendance, it's interesting just to think about, okay, what is a realistic expectation in terms of a digital audience? And I think a really interesting line of thinking is, what does a deep experience look like for a really small group of people? Our digital devotees are likely to pay. So basically, they are one of the most likely group to be paying. And although we've seen the statistics around participation drop slightly since that early pandemic boom, they've been just gradually kind of decreasing. We are seeing the proportion among those who are paying for experiences, they are paying slightly more. So it's like we're seeing a narrowing of the market, but it's sort of deepening in a way. I'll show you a little bit more about this in a moment. So we've had some comments. Oh, Bianca has shared that stat. 47% of audiences nationally are tired of tech. Paul's asked, is the presentation from the webinar available? It will be after this session. Absolutely. You can get in touch with us for a copy of the slides, or the recording will be coming out in the coming days. So basically, while many are tired of tech, digital continues to enable access for some people. So I'll share a couple of comments. Melbourne Digital Concert Hall events, as many recordings are of performances in other cities or states. This way I have greater access to activities I'm interested in but cannot attend in person. And another person said, I live in regional New South Wales, so having online access to city-based events has been an unexpected gift from COVID. And we think that digital presentation is a way of enabling access and managing risk. And for that reason, should still be part of our strategic plans in at least a small way. It's not necessarily for everyone to do in a big way, but I think it's worth thinking about, well, what role does it play? Even if it's a small role, for us to continue providing that access to all members of the community, including the people who don't want to go out right now. So one person said, I think the inclusion of online access has been hugely beneficial to increasing accessibility. There are many people who, for many reasons, have been unable to experience many of the amazing things being created. In-person is, in my opinion, always a much better experience, but where not available, better to be able to access the experience digitally than to miss out altogether. So we'll move on now. Oh, Scott, any thoughts from you on digital? And then I've just got a few final kind of themes to finish with in terms of programming.
Yeah, when it comes to digital, Tandi, is there any research around the level of participation by people with disability over COVID through digital access? Because I think that's a really important thing not to throw out with the bathwater.
Exactly. So people with a disability have been more likely to be participating and more likely to see a substantial role for digital long term. Not everyone with a disability. So providing access for online experiences isn't a straightforward thing either, because there's so many different access requirements. So it's something definitely to consider. But among members of our community who do identify as having a disability, we are seeing a slight, worry that the plethora of digital opportunities may drop off. And so I think it is really important to think about digital as part of access. It's not just people with a disability, but people who are worried about COVID. So some people see a member of their household as being really vulnerable to a breakthrough infection. We're yet to see what the research and data is going to say about, people in terms of those who have an underlying condition and the effectiveness of vaccines. But I think it's really important that we continue doing this in some way as a sector. I think Bianca might be able to point us in the direction. Yes, she already has. So we've got a disability access fact sheet that was from a little while ago now, March. We've also got the dashboard where you can look up those stats, and we released a digital fact sheet more recently that I think might have some stats on that as well for you. So just coming back to whether it's online or face-to-face, basically there's some themes that really resonating with audiences right now. And I'm going to read them out. So what we asked people actually is, what role do you see arts and culture playing to assist your community recovery process? And we heard so many different responses, and these are the 6 themes that really stood out to us. So number 1, place, reanimating places and community spaces, whether it's the outdoor amphitheatre or by the beach or the park, people really want to be outdoors, and they really see the role of the arts in bringing people together outdoors and reinvigorating some of our public places. Connection, that's probably number one for those areas that have experienced lockdown. So bringing people together after isolation. We know it's a huge thing, particularly for our older Australians. We know that COVID continues to be absolutely devastating for people living in aged care facilities. So I think thinking really innovatively about connection. Escapism won't surprise you, but letting us forget our problems and inhabit other worlds. Healing, processing the pandemic, and grieving for what has been lost, and helping us grow and progress as a society. So transformation, I think it's a sign that we shouldn't shy away from hard topics. We need to still be making sure we've got those challenging works, but we're doing it whilst hitting all these other buttons with our programs as well. And then remodel, rethinking the way arts and culture works. So we're running out of time, so I'm just going to basically skip to the end, but basically what I wanted to do is just point you in the direction of the website where you can download our snapshots reports, access the dashboard, subscribe for updates if you're not getting those already. You can arrange a research briefing for your board or your team if you're doing strategic planning. And obviously we've got future webinars coming up. I wanted to leave you with this quote. So basically, arts and culture brings intrigue and uplifting of spirits. I feel it can help us forget the pandemic for a small portion of time and make us hopeful about experiencing life again. It's nice to be among like-minded people who look for the beauty in life. So this quote was from a regional audience member. And I think one of the things that really strikes us in terms of the data from regional audiences is just the power and role of the arts to help in the recovery process, bring people back together. We've had quite a lot of grief and struggle in our communities in relation to the pandemic, in relation to isolation and vaccination being a really difficult issue right now in our communities. And I think what we hope is that the arts and culture can play a big role, particularly as we go into 2022, in bringing people back together and reanimating those local spaces and places. So thank you so much for all your work that you're doing to help rebuild regional audiences. I hope this has been helpful, and if there's anything more we can help with, do just let us know. Scott, is there anything you would like to kind of reflect on in terms of those final kind of themes that I shared?
Those 6 themes are wonderful. I think the one thing I'll look at, we're really excited too about the way which arts and culture might work in the cultural tourism space to encourage that travelling and to encourage that shift from, encourage the travel from metro cities into the regions again, and make sure that we're reboosting and recovering our communities.
Awesome. So yeah, please get in touch if you have any final questions. And Lena, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tandi and Scott. There's so many excellent insights there, and thank you to everyone for attending. And as Tandi mentioned earlier, there's data collection for the final phase of the Outlook Monitor for 2021 that's coming up in early November. So please do keep a lookout for new insights on audience behaviour and sentiments as we come into the summer months. There's sure to be some excellent new insights coming out of that phase of collection too. So thanks again, and have a wonderful day. Bye.